In our last lesson, we talked about Article 38 or the restrictions on the capacity to act. We learned that restrictions to a certain extent operate like prohibitions. They block a particular person's capacity to act. This is in contrast to Article 39 of the Civil Code. Under this provision, the law lays down for us the limitations or the modifications of capacity to act. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to, number 1, identify the modifications or limitations of our capacity to act. 2, explain the underlying reasons behind each modification. 3, distinguish restriction of the capacity to act from modification or limitations of our capacity to act. All of this and more coming right up. This episode is brought to you by Dekada! 10 life lessons from 10 years in law school. Sa akdang ito, ako na ang nagkamali na dapa, lumuha at nasaktan para ikaw kapatid ay makatapos sa loob ng 4 o 6 na taon. Think of it as a game guide, a cheat sheet that you can use throughout your law school journey. By purchasing this ebook, you are sowing the seeds of free legal aid for those who fall within the gaps of the law. With your help, we can bring the law to the people and more people to the law. Grab your copy through the link in the description down below. Hi, my name is Lex and welcome to Lex in Motion. In this channel, I'll be helping you build your competence, confidence, and capability in law school. Start today by hitting the subscribe button below. New episodes are posted every Friday. Article 39 of the Civil Code provides that the following circumstances, among others, modify or limit capacity to act. Age, insanity, imbecility, the state of being a deaf-mute. Penalty, prodigality, family relations, alienage, absence, insolvency, and trusteeship. The consequences of these circumstances are governed in this code, other codes, the rules of court, and in special laws. Capacity to act is not limited on account of religious belief or political opinion. A married woman, 21 years of age or over, is qualified for all the acts of civil life, except in cases specified by law. Ayon kay Justice Paras, ang mga circumstances na naka-enumerate sa ilalim ng Article 39 ay mas malawak ang nasasakupan kumpara sa Article 38. Article 38 covers restrictions or absolute prohibitions on our capacity to act. Article 39, on the other hand, covers a wider range of modifications or limitations. Ayon naman kay Atty. Rabuya, ang restriction sa capacity to act ay hindi nangangahulugan na walang capacity to act ang isang tao, bagkus siya ay pinipigilan lamang ng batas. Sa ilalim naman ng modification o limitation ng capacity to act sa ilalim ng Article 39, binabago ng batas ang ating capacity to act. Mas matalino at mas kumpleto syempre ang aking pagpapaliwanag sa ating nakaraang lesson sa ilalim ng Article 38. Pero daanan na lang din natin ulit dito kapatid para mas maintindihan mo. If you missed that episode kapatid, I will be leaving a link to that in the description down below. When Article 39 mentions age, it refers to the state of minority. A minor is any person below 18 years old. Under Article 38 of the Civil Code, a minor's capacity to act is restricted. When a minor enters into a contract, it may generally not be given any effect except in certain instances. Balikan mo kapatid ang nakaraang discussion for more details. A minor cannot make a will not because he or she does not have capacity to act but because by express provision of the law, his or her capacity to act is restricted or limited by law. By way of modification or limitation, a minor cannot be a witness to a will even if the minor can read or write and is very much able to convey what he or she may witness. Insanity, imbecility, and the state of being deaf-mute are also restrictions on our capacity to act. An insane person is one person who is suffering from some disease of the mind. An imbecile, on the other hand, is a person who may be advanced in age but whose mental ability pertains to a child between the age of 2 to 7 years old. Being deaf-mute or being unable to speak or hear also imposes restrictions on our capacity to act. These people cannot validly enter into contracts, subject of course to certain exceptions. Halimbawa, an insane person or an imbecile can validly enter into a contract with the help of a court-appointed guardian. Being deaf-mute does not completely invalidate one's capacity to act, so long as that person can also read and write. Penalty or civil interdiction and prodigality are also two things we covered during our last lesson. Penalty or civil interdiction is an accessory penalty imposed by law when a person has to be imprisoned for a period of more than 12 years. When a person has to go to jail for more than 12 years, does he lose his capacity to act? Of course not, kapatid, but the law specifically restricts a person's capacity to act. Ang turo dati ng aking mabuting criminal law professor ay para daw maramdaman ng convicted felon na ganap at kumpleto na ang isolation niya mula sa kanyang lipunan. Prodigality o sabi nga sa ating naunang discussion ay ang pagiging panibugho ay isa ring basihan para sumailalim sa guardianship ang isang tao because of the great waste or improvident spending at the risk and danger of impairing the legitimacy of his or her heirs. His capacity to act has to be restricted. Para mas maunawaan natin kapatid kung ano ang modification or limitation, it is useful to think of it as relative incapacity. The capacity to act is there for all intents and purposes except in relation to certain persons or things. Here's what I mean. Halimbawa kapatid, here is Queen. Queen is a semi-successful restaurant owner, recently widowed and did not have a child in her previous marriage. Her husband was a deaf mute but died under suspicious circumstances. Queen is now 28 years old and has been widowed for almost 2 years. Can Queen marry again? Yes. Yes, Queen is not a minor and therefore she can marry. Her prior marriage has been dissolved by death. And now that she has waited the appropriate time for grieving, she is now capacitated to marry. She has the capacity to act, specifically the capacity to marry again. Now, Queen has a twin brother, Fortunato. They have been living and working closely together for most of their lives. Can Queen marry Fortunato? Of course not, kapatid. Their marriage would be void because it would be incestuous. This is what the law means when family relations modify or limit our capacity to act. Queen can marry anyone really except her brother, her father, or her first cousin because these would be void marriages under the law. We can theoretically marry anyone so long as they also have the capacity to marry and that they do not fall among the list of people we cannot fall in love with according to Articles 37 and 38 of the Family Code. This is what I mean by relative incapacity or in the precise language of the law, modifications or limitations on our capacity to act. Family relations, ayon kay Justice Paras, will also modify our capacity to donate or dispose of our property by gratuitous title. We can only give away as much of our property during our lifetimes or even by testamentary disposition to the extent that we do not impair the legitimes or the proportionate share of the estate set aside by law for our forced heirs or those who have to succeed us by express provision of the law. Alienage refers to the state of not being a citizen of the Philippines. Alienage means you are not a Filipino. Alienage is a relative incapacity or a modification or limitation on your capacity to act. The practice of law in the Philippines is limited to Filipino citizens by express provision of Section 2 of Rule 138 of the Rules of Court. Previously, citizens of the United States were allowed to practice law in the Philippines so long as they could prove that they had been part of the Philippine Bar during the Commonwealth prior to the Declaration of the Republic of the Philippines. Aliens, as a general rule, cannot own land in the Philippines except, at ito ay malaking except, kapatid, except through hereditary succession. Maling-mali kapatid na sabihin na hindi pwedeng magkaroon ng real property ang mga foreigners sa ating bansa. The modification or limitation under Article 39 tells us that a foreigner can buy cars, jewelry, or any other personal property in the Philippines. They are, however, prohibited from buying real property. That is the restriction. They can, however, acquire their own residences because the Condominium Act specifically allows foreigners to buy condominium units so long as the 60% of the building belongs to Filipinos. Absence, on the other hand, happens when a person disappears from his domicile. His or her whereabouts are unknown and leaves no agent to manage his or her affairs. Hindi mahirap unawain ang absence, kapatid. Sa wika ng mga kabataan ngayon, ito ay mas kilala sa tawag na ghosting. Bigla na lang nawawala, hindi na natin alam kung nasaan siya. Wala ring pasabi kung saan pupunta o kung kailan siya babalik. O mga taong mawawala na lang ng walang paramdam. The absence of 2 years when the person leaves no one in charge, kunwari ay walang asawa o anak na iniwan. Or the absence of 5 years in case the person leaves a friend, a manager, a lawyer, or anyone else in charge. The lapse of these 2 periods will trigger the declaration of absence. The absentee, or more specifically, the court-appointed manager of the absentee's assets, will have a lot of limitations or modifications on his or her capacity to act. The court-appointed manager cannot sell the absentee's properties or enter into contracts without the approval of the court. Sa parehong paraan ng dalawang natitirang modifications ay ganun din ang effect. Insolvency happens when a person cannot pay off his or her obligations as and when they become due and demandable. Hindi naman nangangahulugan, kapatid, na ang insolvent ay walang pera. Maaring meron siyang mga utang na hindi niya kayang bayaran dahil wala siyang cash. Pero sagana siya sa mga ari-arian gaya ng bahay, building, kotse o mga kabayo. When a person, natural man yan o artificial, is declared by our courts to be insolvent, then it is burdened by modifications or limitations on its capacity to act on the property. Trust, on the other hand, is a legal relationship where ownership of property is transferred to another person for the benefit of another. We can usually see trusts when money is given over to a fund manager who is allowed to a certain extent to invest money in secure or low-risk ventures for the benefit of a child until he or she becomes of age. A trustee has severe modifications or limitations on his or her capacity to act. Limited lang ang pwede niyang kunin sa pondong hawak niya bilang pasahod sa kanyang sarili. Hindi niya pwedeng angkinin ng mga bagay-bagay na kanya ay pinagkatiwala lang ayon sa batas. Last 2 points, kapatid, before we end tonight's lesson. As a final word on capacity to act, Article 39 reminds us that we should not limit our understanding of capacity to act to that which is provided under the Civil Code. Kailangan din nating tumingin sa ibang bahagi ng batas. The provisions on alienage, for example, can be found under the Constitution, under the Rules of Court, and under the Condominium Act. Capacity to act is determined by law, never by a person's religious beliefs or political opinion. Anumang kulay ng iyong pangulo sa darating na halalan, substitute candidate man siya, sabaw-sabaw man siya, o nagamit daw ng cocaine, who you will vote for will never modify or limit your capacity to act. The last sentence of Article 39 you can safely ignore, kapatid. It's a provision of the law, a throwback to the era when women were not treated equally as men. Now, a woman who is 18 years old is qualified in all aspects of the law, except for the provisions on parental consent and parental advice under the Family Code. To summarize tonight's lesson, number 1, Article 38 of the Civil Code talks about the restrictions on capacity to act. These restrictions refer mostly to absolute prohibitions on what a person can or cannot do for those who fall under the enumeration. Number 2, Article 39 of the Civil Code talks about modifications or limitations on capacity to act. These modifications or limitations refer to some form of relative incapacity or incapacity in relation to certain properties, like lands for aliens or for the property entrusted to the trustee. Most, if not all of them, are subject to certain exceptions. 3. Modifications and limitations always cover a wider, broader range of people involving particular acts or property. 4. A person's capacity to act is not limited by his or her religious beliefs or political opinion. Next week, we will cover Article 40 of the Civil Code and the rest of the provisions of the Civil Code on civil personality, on birth and death and dying. No quiz tonight, kapatid. Pahinga muna tayo pagkatapos ng matinding iyakan from last week's episode. If you are watching this and you are not yet in law school, then I want to invite you to join the Law School Bootcamp. It's our program to help determine if you are for law school, if law school is for you, or both. The Law School Bootcamp is happening this December 6 to 12. Classes will start from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. on weeknights and 1 p.m. onwards during the weekends. This is your chance to experience what it feels like to be a hardworking working law student in law school. Register for the Law School Bootcamp through the link in the description down below. If you would like us to continue with the lessons on Intro to Persons, then please let me know by typing yes in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Like and share this video for good law school karma, and I will see you next Friday.